It's 7:01. I'm sure there'll be a few more people that trickle in, but we'll get started. Thanks for tuning in tonight. This is another one of our monthly webinars related to fish, wildlife, and habitat conservation. I just want to thank you first of all for coming. If you haven't attended any of these, we appreciate your time. On the BCWF website, there are a number of our other webinars that have been recorded that are available for your viewing. The objective of the webinar series, of course, is to give you evidence and education and knowledge so that you can advocate on behalf of fish, wildlife, and habitat conservation. Of course, if you tune into these and you listen to them and you don't share it with anybody else, it doesn't really cause a big picture. So the objective here is to give you evidence and to help you understand what goes on in terms of wildlife management and conservation, so you can use that to advocate with your elected officials, to talk with your fellow hunters and anglers, and also to people who don't hunt and fish. So thanks for tuning in. You'll see on your bar for Zoom, there is a Q&A button. I will be monitoring that and dealing with Q&A at the end of the presentation. The way the format will go tonight is we'll introduce Dr. Proffitt. She'll have a presentation, which will be around 45 minutes. And then after that, we'll do some Q&A, probably 15 to 30 minutes. Should have it wrapped up by 8:30ish, which I think is 9:30 your time, Kelly. So that's it. Keep in mind, again, Dr. Proffitt's a researcher. She's here to tell you what went on and how it happened. She's not an elected official or a policymaker. So please, consider your questions in that light. And definitely, I'm sure everybody will be excited giving our issues around elk in the province, and especially in the Kootenays. So the Q&A button is in the bottom. You all know how to use that. If you're coming in from Facebook Live, you can put your questions in the chat, and Martina from the BCWF office will take them and send them my way. So thanks for tuning in. I'll do a quick intro, and then we'll let Dr. Proffitt run things down for you. So Kelly Proffitt is a wildlife research biologist for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. She received her PhD in wildlife biology from Montana State University 2008 and began working for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in 2009. Her research program is focused on ungulate ecology and designed to address the most pressing wildlife management challenges in Montana. Currently, Kelly is coordinating several research projects focused on disease, habitat management, and predator-prey dynamics. Tonight, Kelly will be talking about a 9-year-long predator-prey project recently completed in western Montana's Bitterroot Valley. So with that, Dr. Proffitt, just really want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to come and talk to us in BC. And of course, we have a whole bunch of wildlife that we share across an imaginary line. So it's nice to hear from our neighbors down south, especially coming from the place you do, where you have budgets to do research and applied wildlife management. So thanks.
Great. Well, thanks for having me tonight. As Jesse mentioned, I'm going to be talking about a case study in West Central Montana about integrated carnivore ungulate management. Before I talk, I just want to acknowledge the project I'm talking about. It was a long-term study and involved a number of different folks from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, as well as a number of faculty and staff at Montana State University and the University of Montana. We had a lot of different folks that contributed to make the project successful. And then we also had a lot of different funding sources. We started this on a shoestring budget with a donation from a local sportsman club. And we grew the project over about 10-year period into a pretty large scale research project. But all the different groups that are shown in the figure there were responsible for funding parts of this project. So just to start out with a little bit of background, the recovery of large carnivores, such as wolves, mountain lions, and grizzly bears in North America, it's been a real conservation success. However, the carnivore restoration has also had impacts on some prey populations. Here in Montana, there were widespread concerns following the restoration of wolves, and people had really strong opinions about if this was a good idea or a bad idea, and very strong opinions about what the impact of wolf restoration would be on our ungulate populations. So at about the same time that wolf restoration was occurring in West Central Montana, which was about 2005 to 2010, wolves had come over from the central Idaho wilderness, and populations started to really take off in the early 2000s. About this time period, there was also widespread declines in ungulate populations. And some of these declines in the ungulate populations were deliberate reductions due to prescribed antlerless harvest. However, even after that antlerless harvest was eliminated, ungulate recruitment stayed low and populations didn't rebound. So the timing of those ungulate population declines coincided with the recovery of wolves in the region. And that led to a lot of concerns about the effects of wolves and more generally the effects of carnivores on these ungulate populations. So that was the situation that launched the early stage of this elk study. And the early stages of the elk study, it highlighted the important effects of carnivores on elk survival, and more specifically, the effects of mountain lion predation on elk survival. So in response to that preliminary information and concerns over predation, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Park implemented integrated carnivore-ungulate management programs that utilized a combination of liberalized carnivore harvest regulations and restrictive ungulate harvest regulations, aimed with the goal to achieve increases in the ungulate populations. So the management, it was a multi-species approach to balance carnivores and ungulate numbers for the near-term benefit of ungulates, as well as long-term benefit and persistence of carnivores. And so what I want to talk about tonight is this 9-year research program in West Central Montana that was used to evaluate the efficacy of this integrated carnivore ungulate management program. So integrated carnivore ungulate management programs have been implemented in a variety of different ecological systems, but this type of management is really controversial, and it's often not clear in the literature or in the public eye if these types of programs work. There's a lot of debate and there's a lot of controversy on these programs. So the utility of carnivore harvest management regulations as a tool for reducing carnivore populations and increasing ungulate recruitment, it's really unknown. And it's unknown because there's multiple sources of uncertainty in the ecological processes and the effects of management actions that occur between the point of prescribing carnivore harvest regulations and actually achieving increases in ungulate recruitment. And so I want to talk about some of this uncertainty because that uncertainty sets up for what we measured in our study. So first, there's uncertainty in if prescribed carnivore harvest regulations result in any changes in harvest. And what we've seen is that's been really problematic in other studies. As an example, there's a study in New Mexico where the agency, the Wildlife Management Agency, prescribed liberalized black bear harvest regulations, but there was a lack of public interest in hunting black bears, and the harvest didn't change after those prescriptions were implemented. Similar situation in the Laxaw study in Idaho. They were prescribed liberalized black bear and mountain lion regulations, and for the first few years, that did result in increases in carnivore harvest. But hunter interest and difficulty in accessing the carnivores, it waned over time. And then even though those liberalized carnivore harvest prescriptions were implemented, it didn't actually result in any changes in carnivore harvest. Another source of uncertainty is if changes in carnivore harvest result in actual changes in the carnivore population density. And that's not measured in most studies. Most studies assume that when a liberalized carnivore harvest prescription is implemented, there is an increase in harvest, and the increase in that harvest is biologically meaningful and the carnivore population is reduced. But that's often not measured because it's really difficult to estimate carnivore population abundance. So most of the carnivores that we're interested in here, wolves, mountain lions, bears, they occur in relatively low density and they're elusive. So it's a lot harder to get accurate estimates of carnivore population abundance as compared to our deer and elk surveys, which do a pretty good job in estimating ungulate population abundance. Another source of uncertainty in this chain of logic between prescribing carnivore harvest regulations and achieving changes in your ungulate population are if those changes in carnivore population density would actually result in any changes in ungulate recruitment. And if you look to the literature, there's all different conclusions on how this works. And so overall, the way I would summarize the literature is, well, sometimes carnivore population changes result in changes in ungulate recruitment, but not always. So that change in predation rate, if a carnivore harvest is achieved, it may or may not actually affect ungulate population growth rates, depending on the degree to which predation affects different vital rates as compared to factors such as weather or habitat productivity, which may be limiting the population. And so this is related to the degree to which predation mortality is compensatory or additive. So the efficacy of these integrated carnivore ungulate management programs, it varies widely across systems, and that makes it difficult for wildlife managers to develop and evaluate effective programs to balance carnivore and ungulate populations at the desired levels. What most people really care about is, do these programs work? And it's really difficult to give an answer, yes or no. That would be ideal, but they're very different in each system because there's going to be very complex predator-prey dynamics that are going to vary across systems. And so multiple factors are going to affect the efficacy of these integrated carnivore ungulate management programs. And that includes things like the magnitude of the ungulate and the carnivore harvest treatments, the duration of the carnivore control effort, the weather conditions during and after the carnivore treatments, and interactions with other predator and prey in the system. So the study area that I'm going to be talking about tonight is in West Central Montana. So the area in the red square there. Sorry about that. And this was an area that was treated with an integrated carnivore ungulate management program that was designed to increase elk calf recruitment and elk populations in the region. So to give you an idea of what the study area looked like, the figure on the right is showing the higher elevation portions of the study area were primarily forested, and they were primarily public lands managed by the U.S. Forest Service. The mid-elevation and low elevation areas were a matrix of public and private lands, and those were primarily grasslands, and the private grasslands were managed as ranch lands for agricultural production. Now, within this study area, there's two different elk populations, one in the east part of the study area called the East Fork population, and one in the West Fork population. And the figure on the top is showing you the population trends from 1965 to 2010. And so what you can see is that both populations were relatively stable and increasing through time until about 2005, and then both populations started to decline. That western part of the study area declined faster than the eastern part. The figure on the bottom is showing the estimated number of cows per 100 females. And so that's an estimate of recruitment that's closely monitored, and it's tied to the productivity of the population. And what you can see here is this period from about 2005 to 2010, there were pretty steep declines in calf recruitment. And the 2009 survey recorded only 9 calves per 100 cows. And this is really what raised a lot of the concerns, beyond just public concerns, concerned by our staff and by the biologists about what was happening in this population and what the future trends would be given this really low estimated calf recruitment. So that decline in the elk population abundance and recruitment, it launched Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in collaboration with the University of Montana to conduct a research project in this area. And that original project was called the Top-Down and Bottom-Up Effects on Elk Survival and Recruitment in the Bitterroot Valley. And as part of that project, we collected baseline data for 3 years on everything that we thought might be influencing the elk population. So we collected information on adult elk survival, pregnancy rates, elk movements and habitat use, wolf movements and habitat use. We conducted a couple years of vegetation sampling to look at the landscape of nutrition available to elk, and we estimated calf survival. During this time period, we also had a lot of public meetings. So folks were very concerned about the situation, and throughout this entire process, there is a local sportsman club. They were the original group to petition the agency to conduct a study and figure out what was going on, and more importantly, to do something to increase elk calf survival. And those folks were great partners throughout this process. And they showed up and they were engaged and they were really supportive of the work that we were doing. And really it just helped us get the project going, both financially and logistically. The folks in that club, they knew a lot more about the area and the elk population than any of us on the study team. And we had a really great collaboration with those folks right from the beginning. At the end of that baseline data collection period, what we did is we put all those different pieces together into an elk population model. And we asked that population model to tell us which vital rate was the most important in determining the population growth rate for these elk populations. And what we found is that calf survival and the variation in calf survival was the most important thing influencing the population trajectory. So the increases and decreases in population abundance. At the same time, during these first 3 years of the project, we'd studied calf survival. So we had an intensive capture and monitoring program where we captured calves, we monitored them every day, and then we investigated causes of mortality. So we had strong evidence right out of the gate that wolf predation really wasn't a big concern here. We found a very limited effect of wolves on elk calf survival and relatively limited effect of wolf predation on adult female survival as well. But what we did find is that mountain lion predation was the #1 cause of elk calf mortality. Mountain lion predation was the #1 cause of adult female elk mortality. And that overall mountain lion predation was the most important factor limiting and influencing elk calf survival. So that kind of set us down a different path where we very quickly realized that we needed to focus on the carnivore community itself, specifically on mountain lions, rather than wolves. So we had strong evidence, as I mentioned, that decline had little to do with wolf restoration and wolf populations. But instead, we started to take a much closer look at the mountain lion population and the relationship between elk and mountain lions in this system. So in 2012, by 2012, we had a decent amount of information about what was happening in the population. And the Montana Fish and Wildlife Commission, which is the decision-making commission here in Montana that approves all big game and carnivore harvest regulations. That Fish and Wildlife Commission approved harvest regulations that were designed to reduce the mountain lion population by approximately 30% within 3 of the watersheds in west central Montana. And so that west central portion of Montana, which is shown in the figure, there's essentially 4 watersheds in the area. There's the Bitterroot watershed here, the Blackfoot watershed up here, the lower Clark Fork here. All 3 of those watersheds were experiencing elk population declines, and they were all prescribed a mountain lion harvest management treatment designed to reduce the mountain lion population. This upper Clark Fork watershed here had relatively stable elk populations, and that was an area that was prescribed to be managed for stable mountain lion populations. And so the regulations were held constant in that area. At the same time that these mountain lion regulations went into place, elk harvest had already begun to be restricted in about 2010. And so for the most part, antlerless harvest was restricted across the treatment area. And bull elk harvest also was restricted starting in 2010. So what I want to talk about tonight is evaluating the effectiveness of using those mountain lion harvest regulations as a tool for increasing calf recruitment. And so we had three primary questions that we wanted to address and evaluate as we knew this treatment was coming in 2012. So we designed a study to ask three questions. First, did the changes in harvest regulations result in changes in mountain lion harvest? And second, if so, did those changes in harvest regulations result in changes in mountain lion population abundance? And then if so, did those changes in mountain lion population abundance result in changes in calf recruitment and population growth rate, which is really what we cared about. So the first question, did changes in harvest regulations result in changes in mountain lion harvest? The harvest prescription in the treatment area, which is the South Bitterroot right here, the prescribed male harvest was 3.3 males per 1,000 square kilometers and 2.9 females per 1,000 square kilometers. In the control areas, the prescribed male and female harvest was 2.4 and 0.7 animals per 1,000 square kilometers. And what we found is relatively high management success. So in the 5 years following the implementation of the liberalized mountain lion harvest regulations, most of the quotas were filled. So in this system, the prescribed harvest had high management success and the prescription was achieved through just routine harvest management and hunters on the landscape that were interested in participating. The next question, did those changes in mountain lion harvest regulations result in changes in mountain lion population abundance? That was a lot more difficult to understand because I mentioned earlier, mountain lions in particular, they're super elusive and difficult to count. And so what we did is we used a before-after control treatment type of design to determine the consequences of the prescribed mountain lion harvest on mountain lion population abundance. So we sampled both the treatment and the control area immediately before the harvest treatment was implemented and then 4 years after that treatment had been implemented. And so what that meant in the treatment area here, we estimated population abundance in 2012, just before the treatment was implemented, again in 2016. In the control area, we estimated mountain lion populations in 2013 and 2017. So how to estimate mountain lion population abundance well is a really challenging question. Traditionally, population estimates are based on these long-term studies where you would go into a study area and essentially capture and count all the residents in the study area. And something like that could take 5, 8, 10 years to do. We didn't have that kind of time or money. So we used a set of newer approaches and a new protocol, which was basically, it was a DNA-based spatial capture modeling approach. And what that essentially means is that we used DNA rather than radio collars to identify individual animals over the course of one winter. We intensively sampled the study area, and then we used marker capture models that accounted for the fact that mountain lions are going to be spatially structured in territories across our study area to get an estimate of population abundance in a 3-month period. And that was December, January, and February. And so our Bitterroot study area, which was the area treated, is shown here. And what we did is we dropped an imaginary 5 kilometer by 5 kilometer grid over the study area. We hired a team of houndsmen, and then we assigned them to different search cells each day of the season that had good hunting conditions. They went out with their dog teams, they found tracks, they treat animals. And when the mountain lion was in the tree, we used a biopsy dart collected from a CO2 fired rifle. The houndsman would biopsy dart the animal in the rump, and the dart would go in, collect a muscle sample, and then fall back out. And that allowed the houndsman or the biologist to then go under the tree, retrieve the dart, confirm that there was a muscle sample in there, and then they could take their dogs and leave the area, and the animal could come back down out of the tree and go about its business. So it was a relatively quick process. That DNA then went into a genetics lab at the Rocky Mountain Research Station. And based on that animal's DNA, we could tell if it was a male or a female, and we could get an individual ID. So we knew if we were catching that individual multiple times and in multiple places in the study area. So what we found is that from that period immediately pre-harvest treatment to 4 years after the treatment, so from 2012 to 2016, on average within the treatment area, we estimated a 29% reduction in mountain lion population abundance. But that reduction, it was not uniform across the entire study area. So what the figure here is showing you is the darker the blue, the higher the reduction, the greater the reduction. And then the red and yellow areas are areas of predicted increases. And so what you can see is that in the western half of the study area, there was a larger decline than in the eastern half of the study area. And so when we broke it up into there are two distinct harvest management units that each had their own quotas, what we found is that the district in the east had a predicted 22% decrease, and the district in the west had a 39% decrease pre-treatment to 4 years after treatment. Most of that decline in population abundance occurred in the male segment, and most of that decline happened in the highest quality habitat, likely because that is the area that most hunters were hunting in. And so what we found is that that reduction wasn't uniform, and what really happened is we still had mountain lions spatially across the study areas, but places that had formerly been really high density mountain lion areas had been reduced. And so what that amounted to in terms of numbers, the figure here is showing the predicted population size on the y-axis, and then the time period and study areas on the x. And so these are our two treatment areas here. So this is our pre-treatment 2012 estimate of about 160 animals, and that declines here 4 years after treatment. Over here in our Clark Fork and our control area, we see pretty similar estimates of mountain lion population abundance in 2013, and then 4 years later again in 2017. And so what we could do from this information, we broadly concluded that the prescribed mountain lion harvest regulations were not only achieved through hunting, but that prescription did result in a change of population abundance, on average about a 29% reduction in abundance. So at the end of the study, so in 2016, which was 4 years after the harvest treatment had been implemented, we still estimated that in the western part of the study area, mountain lion population abundance was 3.6 animals per 100 square kilometers. And in the eastern part of the study area, 4.0 animals per 100 square kilometers. And so if any of you are familiar with other mountain lion population estimates, you would know these are relatively high mountain lion population abundances, even after 4 years of treatment. In the control area, as I mentioned, there's a similar abundance in 2013 and 2017, and that amounted to an estimated 2.1 lions per 100 square kilometers, which is a pretty average estimate for most of the Western states. So these population estimates, they are consistent with long-term mountain lion conservation goals. And as I mentioned, these post-treatment estimates in the treatment area are equal or higher than most published population estimates. So this was by no means a management program that removed carnivores or removed mountain lions from the system, but it was a program that effectively produced a moderate reduction in the mountain lion population. So what I think we most care about is, did those changes in mountain lion population result in any changes in calf recruitment? And we use two different approaches and two different independent data sets to address that question. So first, at the individual animal level, as I mentioned, we marked and monitored individual calf survival and cause-specific mortality, and we compared those estimates during the pre-treatment, during treatment, and after treatment periods. And then second, at the population level, we used population count and age ratio data from the 5 years before and the 5 years after the treatment to estimate population level calf survival and population growth. Sorry. So first I want to talk through this individual animal monitoring. So we marked calves intensively and we monitored calf survival from birth daily until age 1. And we did that for 2 years before the mountain lion harvest treatment was implemented, in the year during the harvest management treatment. And then we waited 4 years and we came back and collected another 2 years of calf survival information. What we wanted to know was mountain lion harvest treatment related to changes in calf survival and mortality. So over the course of this study, we caught and marked 534 calves, and we tracked them during their first year of life intensively from the ground, from the air, every day. From when we got a mortality signal, we very quickly, ideally within 24 hours, went to the site and we conducted a mortality investigation to determine the cause of death. And by doing that, we were able to see unique signatures of a black bear, mountain lion, wolf kill. So we collected evidence at the site to determine first if it was a carnivore kill, and if so, which carnivore killed the animal. And so we had a really conservative estimate of this. So if we couldn't find what's shown in the bottom figure there, which is evidence of an actual bite that resulted when the animal's heart was beating, you would see blood under the skin, something like that. We required that evidence to be there. Otherwise, we classified it as an unknown type of predation. And that allowed us to distinguish between true predation events and animals that might die of natural causes and then be scavenged by carnivores. We also collected DNA swabs at bite wounds and around the carcass. And then we used the DNA to sort of confirm what we were seeing in the field and tell us, was this a black bear, a wolf, or a mountain lion at the kill site? And so what we found, we used typical survival modeling, then to put that information together to estimate summer survival and winter survival of elk calves. And so that's what you're seeing in the figures here. So along this x-axis here, this is time and days during the summer. So day 0, that's the day that the calf is born, which is about June 1st in this study area, till the end of summer, 180 days later. Winter, day 0, starts on November 26th, and then that calf goes through the winter until it turns a year old the next June 1st. And so our green lines here are our estimates of summer and winter survival during the mountain lion harvest treatment. And it was in that year during treatment that summer and winter calf survival was the highest. The red line is our estimate of pre-treatment era elk calf survival during the summer and the winter. And in both the summer and the winter, that pre-treatment calf survival was the lowest. During the treatment, 4 years following the treatment is our blue line. And so what you can see is summer survival, 4 years post-treatment, it wasn't as high as during the treatment. It had started to come back down, but it was still higher than before any carnivore treatment had been applied. And in terms of numbers, what did those estimates look like? So our estimated summer survival probability was about 50% pre-treatment. It went up to about 75 during the treatment, and then it came down to about 60% post-treatment. Winter survival overall was higher than summer survival, which is to be expected because it's that summer period where calves are really vulnerable and you see big pulses of mortality in that first 30 or 60 days of life. So winter survival is generally a little bit higher, from about 75% pre-treatment to 90% during the treatment, and then back down to about 80% 4 years following the treatment. In terms of what was actually killing the calves during these time periods, we also had information on that we used cumulative incidence functions to estimate the probability of mortality during summer and winter. And so what you can see here is, again, we've got the summer panel on the left, the winter panel on the right. The probability of being killed by a mountain lion was during either summer or winter was highest during that pre-treatment era, that's the red dot. During treatment and post-treatment, the probability of being killed by a mountain lion was reduced. At the same time, we see a little bit of a change in that non-predation category. So we had calves that died of a variety of natural causes. We had a little bit of pneumonia. We had a calf go into the river. We had a roadkill. So there's a whole variety of different things not related to carnivores that are going on in the study area. And what we saw in that non-predation category, during the summer and the winter, was that in that pre-treatment era, so when carnivore populations were generally a little bit higher before the mountain lion treatment was implemented, we had very little non-predation related mortality in either the summer or the winter. And that's very typical in systems that have relatively high carnivore densities. So animals that get sick or that get weak, they're not lasting long enough, and carnivore will take them. What we see here is that we see evidence that non-predation related mortality increased during the carnivore treatment period, and again in that post-treatment era. So that individual, the marking and the tracking of those individual calves did show evidence that during and following the mountain lion carnivore treatment, we were seeing increases in calf survival that may have been related to reductions in mountain lion predation. But we used a second independent data set to sort of scale that sample of 535 calves or whatever it was up to the population level. And so as part of our routine survey and inventory program, we fly counts every winter in late March or early April to estimate the total elk population abundance and then collect that age ratio data. So we use that independent data set and information from the 5 years prior to the mountain lion treatment and information from the 5 years following the mountain lion treatment to estimate a population model and ask the question, was calf survival different in the 5 years post-treatment and pre-treatment? And was overall population growth rate, lambda, different in the 5 years post-treatment and pre-treatment? So what went into that model is, as I talked about in this South Bitterroot study area that received the mountain lion treatment, there's 2 elk populations in there, one in the east, one in the west. In the control area, there's also 2 populations. They're named according to the hunt unit that they're in, hunt unit 210 and 216. So we had data from 5 years before and 5 years after from 2 populations in the treatment area and 2 populations in the control area. And this is just an example of what the information looks like. The year of treatment, we censored that information out because that treatment happened midway through the year. And so we essentially censored that out and we took just the 5 years before and the 5 years after. So we also had some harvest in this system. So we accounted for harvest by simply removing those animals from the population abundance estimate because we knew that was a human related cause and we didn't want the changes in harvest management to influence our results. In our population model, we also accounted for things like winter severity and summer growing seasons, different weather factors that may have influenced overall population productivity. So in the background of our model, we were able to account for things like that. And what we found in terms of estimated elk calf recruitment rate in the 2 elk populations in the control area and the 2 elk populations in the treatment area is we see strong evidence over here in these two populations in the area that was treated with mountain lion harvest management. Both showed increases in elk calf recruitment in the post-treatment era as opposed to the pre-treatment era. That result was much stronger here in the western part of the study area as opposed to the eastern part of the study area. The two elk populations here, unit 210 and 216, which were in our control study area, they had very similar calf recruitment during the pre-treatment and the post-treatment era. So what we can broadly conclude from both of these two independent data sets was that elk calf recruitment population growth rate did increase in the years following mountain lion population reduction. And so I just want to end with a couple of concluding thoughts. And so overall, our results demonstrate a situation in Western Montana where carnivore predation affected elk and where carnivore populations were managed sustainably as a valued wildlife resource while also moderating predation effects on elk. So in this particular case study, there was an estimated 2-year 17 and 12% mountain lion population harvest rate in the two districts that we conducted this study. And that resulted in overall about a 29% reduction in the mountain lion population abundance. And so that type of treatment, it did achieve short-term increases in calf recruitment population growth rates, but we saw in both of our data streams that those increases sort of waned over time after the harvest treatment was backed off. We also saw evidence that weather certainly affected the dynamics of these elk populations. And so in the background of all of these harvest management programs, we have weather which can mediate the positive or negative effects of reduced carnivore densities on elk populations. So these particular prescribed harvest regulations did achieve both the carnivore and the ungulate population management objectives in this case. But again, one would need to use caution in generalizing these results to other systems that have other predator-prey communities. So these specific carnivore harvest rates that were prescribed and achieved in this particular study, they may or may not correspond to any changes in ungulate vital rates in other study systems. And that's because these predator-prey relationships are complex and they vary pretty widely across systems. But what I think one of the good take-home messages from this case study, which does translate to other areas, is that the quantitative and the analytical tools for monitoring carnivore and ungulate populations that we developed and presented here, they are widely applicable for intensively monitoring pre-treatment and post-treatment carnivore and ungulate populations. And by doing that, there's real potential to sort of move the field forward and provide valuable and useful information to managers across a variety of systems. By applying these types of tools, we can hopefully improve our understanding of carnivore harvest management as a potential tool for increasing ungulate populations in different ecological systems. We can also provide reference carnivore harvest rate targets for wildlife managers that might be prescribing carnivore harvest with goals of achieving specific ungulate population responses. And last, and maybe most importantly, by doing a good job quantifying the effectiveness or the lack of effectiveness of these integrated carnivore ungulate management programs, we can provide information for decision makers so that they're able to start to better use science to inform what are very controversial harvest management decisions. And so overall, I would see the tools and the take home from this particular project. They can just provide a reference for how one might think about designing management programs and evaluating these programs. In these types of really thorough evaluations, they're needed to learn more about integrated management and get us past the point of fighting about, do they work, yes or no? It's a lot more complicated. We need to understand, well, why are they working or why are they not working, so that we can look across systems and start to understand if and when there might be a place to effectively apply these programs. So with that, I will take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Dr. Proffitt. That was great. I'm just going to get my video back on.
Okay.
That was awesome. So we do have a few questions that have already come in. We have, along with our mule deer project, we have a cougar project on the go, and there was some discussion about bears bumping cougars off of harvested mule deer, and then that ups the number of deer that cougars end up killing. I guess, did you see or experience that related to bears and cougars, but also to wolves? Was there any, did you look at any of that?
We didn't. So that's a good point, and that's come up a bunch. That was not part of our study design. We have a new long-term predator-prey project where that is a formal part of it. But probably about the second year of the project, that came up as an important concern. And we did have a set of trail cams. We primarily put them out on our female elk carcasses. They were bigger, they lasted longer, and we wanted to get an idea of who in the carnivore community was using those carcasses when. So opportunistically on both the collared females and then the calves, we did deploy cameras. When the calves were little, I don't think it was probably much of an issue because I think handling time, the whole thing, they were little, they didn't last long. Even if we got there to sample them, 18, 20 hours later, there wouldn't be a lot left. But certainly as those calves got bigger, and there was more there was the potential. The big concern in our study area, I didn't mention, this is an area that does not have grizzly bears, and it has relatively moderate black bear populations. The bigger concern in this area was if the mountain lion kill rates were being artificially inflated because wolves were bumping lions off the carcasses. In an opportunistic camera trapping effort, we did not see evidence of that, but it wasn't something that we formally evaluated.
Thank you. So you covered there's no grizzly bears in the area. Was there data related to predation of carnivores other than cougars, i.e. wolves and bears? You had the graph on cougars. Can you fill that one in?
Yeah, I don't think I have it here. I kind of cut some details in the interest of trying not to be too long and boring. Black bears were not very important. So we had black bear kills from day 0 birth out until I think about day 40. That was the end of the period that bears had an influence. And heading into this, I would have expected higher black bear mortality because that Idaho study, which was just over the hill from where we worked, showed black bear predation was a very important part of their elk population dynamics. We didn't see evidence for that. And in fact, even in being out and searching for calves and conducting the study, did not see a lot of black bears. So I think in the system, it might just, even though we were geographically really close to that Idaho study, probably lower bear populations. We didn't see much in the way of wolf predation in the early sampling periods, so when those calves were really little. But then we did see some wolf predation in the winter. I'd say at the maximum, it was up around 4% of the mortality though. So it never amounted to being an important part of the calf survival story. We had in our sort of baseline monitoring period, we marked and monitored about 140 females for 3 years. And we did see some wolf predation, particularly in that late winter period on the females. But the difference was with mountain lion predation, we saw it kind of slow and steady during all 12 months. And then over the course of the year that accumulated. With the wolf predation, it tended to be overall less and concentrated in that winter period. And so relative to mountain lion predation, it just didn't float to the top as an important factor.
Thanks. This is a little bit, maybe a little bit trickier. Now, in terms of the DNA swabs, were you looking at mDNA and trying to identify individual cougars?
No, we didn't. And that would have been really interesting. The quality of the DNA that we got out. So what we did is like if we found a bite wound or a scat sample or something like that, we could collect it and send it to the lab. And we had relatively high success getting species ID off of that. But the quality of the DNA, I don't think it would have allowed us to get an individual ID. But it would have been really interesting, particularly with the bear predation we had, to see if that was in fact sort of a variety of animals or a couple of individuals that were really targeting the elk.
Okay, great. This gets a little bit outside of your world, and maybe I'll rephrase it a little bit, but did the science change the controversy, or did the public engagement change the controversy, or did just the issue change then?
I don't think the science necessarily changed anybody's mind about what was happening, but I do think in the community, I think nobody fundamentally changed their values when it comes to wildlife. But it did broaden the discussion beyond just wolves. And we know what the problem is, and Fish and Game just needs to go fix it. It really broadened the discussion to take a closer look at what was happening with the mountain lion populations. And for the 10 years leading up to those 2012 regulations, there had been essentially zero female harvest of mountain lions in the system. And so it's pretty logical with that type of, mountain lion harvest management, which just hadn't been on people's radar. It hadn't been the forefront of the discussion, but it's reasonable to assume that lion populations probably really increased during that period of zero female harvest. So yeah, the controversy didn't go away, and I'm not sure anybody necessarily changed their minds. But I do think we made some strides with, making a good faith effort to try and come in, address the concerns, provide some information about what was happening, and try some new management strategies. Some folks thought the carnivore regulation should have been far more liberalized. Some folks thought there should be no carnivore harvest. So it really spans the gamut. And what the agency arrived on was, I think, a pretty moderate approach to trying to not swing too far towards population reduction, but still see if they were able to manipulate the system using traditional harvest management.
Okay, we'll segue. There's quite a few around cougars and cougar management and female cougars. I guess one is, what are the regulations for harvesting female cougars, i.e. around family units? And then, I mean, a lot of this focuses on, I can tell we have a few wildlife managers on here, mountain lion harvest rates. Did you look at that, the potential if you increase mountain lion harvest rates to moderate the population, if you would expect an increase in calf survival, or does compensatory mortality take over?
So yeah, jump in if I get this wrong. So the concern about the removal of females that might have kittens, was there a question about that?
Yeah, how do the regulations apply down there around female cougar harvest, basically?
Yeah, so it's a quota system. And in this area, it's a hybrid quota system, which means during the early part of the season, permit hunters can hunt. And then midway through the season, if the quota is not filled, anybody with the general tag can hunt at that point. So that's what's called a hybrid. The early part is permit only. Late, there's more hunters on the landscape. And each unit has a maximum quota and then a female sub-quota. So it was really those female sub-quotas that were increased. And the regulation there is obviously you can't harvest if she has kittens. You can't harvest a kitten with spots. We have a mandatory check and reporting program where you take your animal, I think within 24, 48 hours. You go through a check by either the biologist or the warden, and they take a look at your animal, confirm sex, and then that's how we track our quotas.
Okay, great. And then
Exactly what you were asking, but
yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions that I'm just trying to kind of filter them. But
okay.
Another one is, did you do any modeling around if you increase the cougar harvest even higher than you did you expect that calf recruitment would continue to increase, or were there any signals that it would plateau? Maybe is the question.
We didn't have any direct data on what would have happened. We do see some evidence that higher quota would have resulted in continued reductions in mountain lion specific mortality, but it's really uncertain if those calves would have gone on to die of other causes. I probably shouldn't even speculate on how that would work, but what I do think could have been changed is the duration of the treatment. So I think we have a pretty good understanding of what, pretty moderate treatment would do. That treatment was only implemented for about 2 years. It was initially designed to be a 3-year reduction and then managing for stability. There was a lot of public controversy. It ended up being a 2-year treatment and then stable management. And during that time period, that's where we started to see sort of the waning effects of that treatment on calf recruitment. So I think if that same harvest had been applied for a longer duration, we would have continued to see responses in the elk population that would have been greater than what we measured.
Okay, great. And then a few questions going back to calf survival started to decline, and this is probably, you've heard a lot about this, and wolves were recolonizing. Is there, have you looked at any kind of competition between the two, or how that if there's an interaction between wolves, even if it isn't direct, the effect isn't direct on elk?
So we didn't do any direct analysis. We had collared mountain lions and collared wolves. What we did do was a scat study to look at seasonal diet selection of wolves and mountain lions to see during which season those diets might overlap. And not surprisingly, what we saw, the wolf diet was primarily elk during all seasons, switching more towards calves in the winter, and more focused on adult females in the summer. The mountain lion diet, there's a mule deer special management area within this part of the Bitterroot Valley. And so, especially in that eastern portion of the study area, there's a fairly abundant mule deer population. And so what we saw in the lion diet data, especially, was sort of a more equal mix of deer and elk, than switching to being more elk focused in the summer period. So we didn't directly look at any kind of carcass stealing or influence on movement behaviors, but we did do the diet study just to see what they were queuing into in which season. And certainly there's no doubt that wolves are eating elk in this system. And yeah, I don't want the results to suggest that, because that's not the case. Certainly they are. The diet studies showed that very clearly. But numerically, I just don't think there's as many wolves in the system as mountain lions. And so given the relatively small numbers of elk that we had marked and tracked relative to the population and the number of wolves and lions on the landscape, when you scale up to that population level overall, that more abundant mountain lion population seem to have a greater influence than the wolves, which are certainly there. They're certainly eating elk. There's just not quite as many of them.
Gotcha. We'll change the station here just for a quick second, and this is part of the fact that, you know, Montana, it spends more per square kilometer per species per person per every metric on wildlife management. What was the overall cost of this study? Do you have that handy or a ballpark?
Yeah, it was about 1.8 million for the whole thing. And it started out, I think I mentioned, with a $5,000 donation from the Sportsman Club. And then the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation kicked in, and Safari Club, and different groups kicked in. We got enough money to get it going, and we sort of built momentum. And then in the third year of the project, or no, sorry, the fourth year of the project, we were able to go to Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and get a Pittman-Robertson grant to fund the remainder of the project. Cool. It started out on a shoestring, and it grew into something much larger by the end.
Sounds like a wildlife project.
Yeah.
A few questions around behavior. Did you look at any of kind of the individual level effects of cougars and cougar predation on elk? Did you see any differences between what they were selecting for in terms of male or female cougars were selecting for different species or parts of the ungulate population?
We didn't look at that. I mean, I'd expect that, yeah, perhaps the female part of the cougar population might have been more deer focused and focused on calves and smaller prey than the males, but I can't say for sure.
Thanks. Did you do, now this comes, any like hazard modeling around looking at where elk were killed, or if there's anything related to forest density or cover or habitat quality? Did you do any of that kind of analysis?
No, we have a really great kill site data set, because unfortunately we did have a lot of kills in the course of this project, but as of yet we've not looked at that. The habitat question, we did do a pretty thorough evaluation of that. We had 2 years of field sampling, where we're mostly interested in the landscape of nutrition, but at the same time we were able to, you know, consider the flip side of that, which would be the landscape of security. On the nutritional side, we saw pretty good evidence in here that there were nutritional differences in that gradient from east to west across the study area. A lot of that was related to wildfire. And so there was some pretty significant wildfires in 2000, 2007, and 2013, primarily in the eastern part of the study area. And so those forests there were a really nice mosaic of sort of early successional and late successional. So good nutrition, but also good security. The western part of the study area, we saw more mature closed canopy forest and lower nutrition. We estimated lower nutrition at our field sites. And that did correspond to overall lower body fat and pregnancy rates in those elk in the western part. So in western Montana, southwest Montana, we generally assume like a 92% pregnancy rate, which is what we saw in the east part of the study area. But that west part of the study area, annually, we saw pregnancy rates anywhere from, I think, 67 to 74%, so lower than what we would expect, and likely due to some nutritional limitations as a result of not a lot of disturbance in that forest system.
Gotcha. And that system, just to follow up, because it'll probably come, is that fire maintained? What's the, historically, what would the interval have been, or what would that landscape, how has it changed, I guess? Or has it?
I think there's a lot of standing fuel after very limited wildfires from about 1920 to 1970. But I will say there has historically, or at least during the 70s and 80s, quite a bit of timber production in the western part of the study area. But that timber has really dropped off as well. And so there's less wildfire, less timber, more aging forests in that portion of the study area.
Thanks. There's a number around kind of alternate prey. Did you have any other species collared at that time that you were looking at to see if there was any kind of prey switching that went on or behavioral effects, anything like that?
No, we didn't. It would have been nice to have it all planned out in advance. There's some moose in the western part of the study area, but very limited mule deer in the western part. But then in the eastern part, a pretty abundant mule deer population. Then we've got whitetail scattered throughout. So certainly in the east part of the study area, there is alternate prey available for carnivores. But we don't have good numbers or good information on what that might look like.
Awesome. And then this is just generally around predator harvest targeting males and modifying predator prey dynamics in the long term. It's kind of a bit of a loaded question for you, but do you have any of the off the top of your head around that? And I guess part of your when you change the harvest regulations, you're still targeting males predominantly and then females as well. Was there a rationale for that?
So the rationale for gearing it towards population reduction was to increase the female segment of the harvest, as well as, some increase, but there had been some male harvest in the study area. The male harvest didn't increase nearly as much as the female. So the plan was to ratchet the male harvest up a little bit and kind of continue that, and then apply sort of a short pulse of intensive female harvest to drop that population and then try and manage for stability. Of course, one of the big criticisms of that is, if you're removing these mature males from the landscape, and that's going to be who's likely to be targeted by hunters taking mountain lions. By removing those mature males that are defending territories, you could get an influx of new animals into your system, and that's certainly possible. Our goal is to manage for stable mountain lion populations, not this cyclical, because it's these big changes, and we've had them in Montana, these big changes in harvest is where I think you destabilize the whole social structure, and that's where you have this opportunity for backfill and things like that. We are aware of that, and the goal is to have more moderate population management and try and manage for that population rather than drop them way down for 5 years and then let them come way back to some other level and then drop them way down for 5 years. And part of that goal of managing for stability, or at least dropping to the point where you want the population to be and then managing for stability, is to sort of limit those pulses of harvest that might be, really encouraging animals to move around the landscape. And and that was also the rationale for these watershed level treatments, to try and minimize those source sink dynamics. We're treating the whole watershed to essentially reduce the probability of those types of changes happening. And didn't really mention it, but the study area sits up against the central Idaho wilderness areas, and then another portion of Idaho that have fairly liberal harvest regulations for lions as well. So there's certainly the potential for animals to be moving around the landscape, but the places that the treatment were implemented, they were pretty widespread landscape level or watershed level treatments.
Okay. And then post, I guess in that area, as the lion population, have you continued to manage it kind of in a stabilized, and what are you seeing the elk do now?
Yeah, so let's see, the treatment was implemented in 2012 for about 2 years. There was a lot of controversy. In 2014, there was a new, we went through a formal structured decision-making process with the Citizens Advisory Council to help develop harvest management regulations. And those management regulations have been in effect since 2014. So the numbers of the harvest quotas have gone up or down a little bit each way, but they've essentially been fairly stable since that 2014 period. And we have seen pretty slow, steady increases in the elk population, particularly in that eastern part of the study area.
Great. Okay. This is a bit off topic, but we'll throw it out there. Did the ranchers notice any effect on their cattle around cougar predation? Anything like that? Any other social externalities?
I don't know. I don't think so. And yeah, I should mention, it's quite a bit of ranching in the eastern part of the study area. And over the course of this project, we did have collared wolves. We also had a decent amount of wolf control related to conflict with livestock. And so one of the ways that the wolf population, I think, was limited during this study was through control efforts that related to depredation events. We did have hunter harvest and then trapping in the later years of this study that certainly had an influence on the wolf population. But those removal actions also are part of the picture of what's happening in this landscape. Because it is a human dominated landscape. This is not a wilderness area by any stretch of the imagination. But I haven't really heard folks talk about any livestock mountain lion interactions.
Okay, that's great. And then I'm sure this will come up now. Do you have any idea what the wolf population density, like what the estimate was during that time in the treatment area?
I do, but I don't know offhand.
Okay, perfect. You'll get that in a follow-up. We had, so this is our webinar last month was on a big BC moose project where they were taking cortisol and bone marrow samples and a whole bunch of other stuff. Did you do any of the health workup on your elk?
We didn't do anything with cortisol, but yeah, during their first 3 years, in particular with the females, they got a full workup. And so we did the full serology screen for the whole suite of, wildlife diseases that are of concern in this part of the world. We also estimated body weight based on chest girth. We estimated percent ingested-free body fat, using an ultrasound. And then, yeah, we did the direct measurements for the landscape nutrition modeling. At the mortality sites, we certainly cracked the femur and looked at animal condition. Especially for those females, there was a big pulse of mortality, March, April, May, sort of that late winter and carryover late winter effects. Both natural mortality and increases in predation. A lot of those animals that died of predation also were in poor condition, as you'd expect during that time period. Yeah, so we didn't find anything in any of the serology work. Nothing out of the ordinary or no overt disease issues. We did have one calf die of pneumonia. There's quite a bit of water, and these elk are crossing pretty early, probably ingesting water, and that can be a thing. It was not as big of an issue in this study as in some of the other studies I've seen. I think we only had 1 or 2 cases of documented pneumonia. So we did have some health and nutrition concerns, especially evidence of those nutritional limitations on pregnancy rates. But we didn't find anything that was, a major health concern.
Right, and okay, good. And then kind of following up, I'm trying to line these up. This one ties into cause-specific mortality. It looked like the shift, when you started the treatment, that non-predation events went up. So I guess the question is that mortality at least in part compensatory, or how did you deal with that?
So I think it suggests that some of the predation that we were seeing was probably compensatory, because when we kind of removed some of those predators from the system, then we did see increasing natural mortality. I still don't think we necessarily had enough data to make a really strong statement about how that might be working, though.
Gotcha. Here's a theoretical question. In a different type of system, maybe one that wasn't found to be predator limited, i.e. so you went through the cougar reduction and you didn't see a response, what other factors might limit the system? And then what are the treatments that might be appropriate? So I guess the question is, if predation, if the system is not predator limited, what could the factors be and how would you deal with that?
Yeah, well, I think that two different ways that could play out is we certainly have systems where weather is a limiting factor. And so those would be places primarily, you know, here I think of them as areas with higher elevation winter ranges, so more difficult places for elk to be surviving, sort of that most difficult time of the year. So you could have winter severity, or winter conditions is certainly something that can happen. If you've got too many elk on the landscape, you can get nutritional issues that are going to limit productivity and population performance and overall health of the population. So in the western part of Montana, we talk a lot about predation. In the central part of Montana, we talk quite a bit about overabundant elk populations, and there are real effects of overabundant elk populations. So that would be another alternative for elk could be limiting themselves in some of these systems where we have populations that have far exceeded both social and ecological carrying capacity, social tolerance and ecological carrying capacity. And then there's also the landscape of nutrition and sort of these more subtle influences of potential climate and declines in timber management and patterns of wildfire that do have the potential to alter the quality of the habitat and the quality of the nutritional resources that are available to animals. So there's a whole variety of different things that could limit your population. And I do think it's really variable. We see that as we work across the state. You know, it's not the same thing that's limiting our elk populations everywhere. And that's one of the complicated factors. I mean, we came into this project thinking we were going to do an elk wolf study and making some assumptions that wolves were limiting the system. And that was because we'd had quite a good history of elk wolf research in the greater Yellowstone area that showed very strong evidence that there were these close relationships between wolves and elk. And in all of those studies that sort of led up to this 2010 period, you know, mountain lions weren't part of the discussion. And so moving that sort of research focus that had been very good in the greater Yellowstone area and showed these strong relationships between wolves and elk, we went into this sort of thinking those results were going to translate. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to go to West Central Montana to sort of check ourselves and see, you know, do these results coming out of Southwest Montana, do they translate? And it wasn't too long into the study that I think we quickly convinced ourselves, like, you know, the take home from what isn't too far away geographically, it really wasn't the right thing to be going after. So.
And then you had to do the social work as well.
Yeah. So in Montana, we use quite a bit of citizens advisory councils, and on a lot of our more controversial wildlife management decisions, we'll go through a formal structured decision-making program where we'll get different stakeholders to the table. You know, this mountain lion harvest management, we had 14 stakeholders, I think 12 or 14 on the working group. It was like a few months process, a lot of meetings to go through this formal decision analysis process. And ultimately that group of stakeholders provided the harvest management recommendation to our Fish and Wildlife Commission that they then adopted. And so it's a different way of doing business, but it's those structured decision-making approaches, really good ways on these controversial issues to sort of elucidate and clarify, like, this is the problem, these are the values that we're dealing with, and force people to have those conversations about what's the best decision that we can make. So we did end up in that structured decision-making process with this mountain lion harvest management situation.
Yeah, SDM is always all kinds of fun. Okay, well, it's getting late in your part of the world, and
Yep.
we fielded a ton of questions. So really, Dr. Proffitt, like to thank you, especially, you're not from BC and you're sharing what's going on in Montana and talking about your experiences. That's huge for us here. Really appreciate you taking the time to put the presentation together, do the question and answer thing. We will follow up on a couple of the questions, maybe around wolf density. Get your 2-pager, and we'll get your papers as well. A few people have asked them, we'll post them. And yeah, just really appreciate you taking the time, and like to thank Martina as well, who's been doing all the technical work in the background. The next webinar we have is survival of Pacific salmon released or escaped from fisheries capture. So essentially that deals with catch and release and nets and how that affects salmon. That's with Dr. Scott Hinch from UBC. That is May 27th, I believe. So if you all online want to tune into that one, we would be delighted to have you. And thank you all. If you have other questions, Dr. Proffitt has kindly agreed to answer them offline, and we'll get those out on our website and via email. So again, thanks, Dr. Proffitt. Appreciate it. Thanks for staying up late and telling us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Right on. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.